Welcome back, everybody. Ready to dive into something pretty fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Always up for a good mental workout.
So today, we're going to be tackling emotions, learning, and cognition.
Ooh, quite the trio.
Yeah, we've got excerpts from a psych textbook, some academic papers, and even a few crash course videos.
Sounds like a pretty comprehensive mix.
Definitely. And by the end of this deep dive, we'll have a better grasp on just how our minds tick
How our emotions influence what we do.
and how the way we learn shapes our understanding of the world. Ready to jump in?
Lead the way.
Okay, so imagine this. You're sound asleep, and bam, you're jolted awake by a loud bang. Your heart's pounding, you're sweating, fear is washing over you.
Oh, yeah, classic fight or flight response kicking in. That's your physiology, that arousal going into overdrive.
Right. But have you ever considered that maybe you don't feel fear because of the noise itself, but because your body's reacting that way?
You're talking about the James Lange theory of emotion.
Exactly. So it's not the spooky sound that makes me scared. It's my own body freaking out that's causing the fear.
It might sound kind of strange at first,
It really does.
but there's actually evidence to support it. Studies have shown that people with spinal cord injuries, the kind that limit physical arousal, report feeling emotions less intensely.
So if my body's not reacting as strongly, I won't feel the emotion as strongly.
That's what the James Lange theory suggests, yeah. However, the Cannon-Bard theory offers a bit of a different take. It suggests that those emotional and physical responses happen simultaneously.
So not one causing the other, but happening at the same time.
Exactly.
But hold on, we can't forget the mental side of things, can we? Our thoughts play a role too, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's where the Schachter and Singer two-factor theory comes in. They argue that we actually label our arousal based on our thoughts and the context of the situation.
Okay, now this is ringing a bell, kind of like that experiment with the epinephrine injections.
You're remembering it right. They injected some participants, but didn't tell them what to expect.
While others were told about the side effects.
Exactly. Then they introduced an actor who was either really happy or really angry.
And the people who didn't know why they were feeling jittery ended up mirroring the actor's emotions. Happy actor, happy participant, even though their physical response was from the injection, not their actual mood.
Isn't that fascinating? Shows how much our interpretation of a situation matters.
So if I'm all worked up after, say, a crazy commute,
Yeah.
and I walk in to find my roommate is in a terrible mood, am I misinterpreting my own feelings because of their mood?
It's definitely possible. That's why it's super important to be aware of how our surroundings can influence our emotions.
Okay, that was a lot about emotions. Let's switch gears and talk about learning. I mean, we all know about the basics, like rewards and punishments.
Right, the classic ways of thinking about it.
But then I came across this experiment, and it blew my mind.
You're talking about the Bobo doll experiment, right?
Exactly. It just shows how powerful observational learning can be. So there's this kid watching an adult beat up an inflatable clown doll.
Punching it, kicking it, the whole works.
And later, that same kid is left alone in a room with the doll. What do you think happened?
I think I can guess. The kid probably imitated what they saw, right?
You got it. The children who watched the aggressive behavior were way more likely to act aggressively toward the doll themselves.
So we're not just learning from direct experience, but by watching others too.
Makes you think about all the things we pick up just by observing, right? From how we talk to the way we dress.
Absolutely. It's a constant process of observation and absorption.
Now, let's not forget those classic learning methods, though. Remember classical and operant conditioning from the crash course video?
Oh, those are fundamental. So classical conditioning.
Like Pavlov's dogs, right?
Exactly. Connecting a neutral thing with a reflex. Ring a bell every time you feed a dog. Eventually, the dog starts drooling at just the sound of the bell, even without the food.
And then there's operant conditioning. It's about linking a voluntary behavior with a consequence.
Right, a reward or a punishment. Think about training a pet. You give a treat when they do a trick. You say no when they chew on your shoes. They learn through those consequences.
So classical conditioning is all about reflexes, while operant focuses on actions we choose to do.
Exactly. But here's a fascinating twist. Our biology actually plays a role in what we can learn through conditioning.
Really? Like how?
Well, think about pigeons. They're more likely to peck for food than flap their wings to get it.
Why is that?
Because pecking is a natural behavior for pigeons when they're looking for food. It's instinctual, making it easier to condition that behavior.
So we're kind of predisposed to learn certain things more easily than others.
In a way, yes. But there's another cool thing about learning that goes beyond this simple conditioning. Have you heard of cognitive maps?
The cognitive maps. Not really.
It's basically a mental blueprint of our surroundings. It's how we understand the layout of our house or how to get to the store. We update these maps all the time, even without any direct reward for doing so.
It's like knowing how to get around your neighborhood, even if you haven't walked every single street.
Precisely. And this brings us to something called latent learning, learning that happens without us realizing it until we need to use it.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of rats running a maze. The rats who got to explore the maze without any rewards still learned the layout, and then when there was food at the end, boom, they navigated just as well as the rats who got rewards the whole time.
So they were taking in information, even when there was no obvious reason to? That's wild.
It shows that learning isn't just about stimulus-response connections. Our brains are constantly processing, making connections, forming these mental representations.
Which actually ties back to that observational learning we talked about earlier, right? We're always watching, processing, creating these mental maps.
You got it. Think about it. We learn so much about social norms, trends, all sorts of things just from watching other people. We take in information and decide how to use it later.
But what about understanding someone's emotions or feeling empathy? Do we learn those things through observation too?
That's a great question, and it takes us to the world of mirror neurons. These are neurons that fire not only when we do something, but also when we see someone else doing it.
Hold on, so if I see you reaching for that cup of coffee,
Yeah,
the same neurons in my brain would fire as if I was reaching for it myself.
exactly. While research is still going on, many scientists think that mirror neurons are key to us understanding other people's actions, intentions, maybe even emotions.
That's incredible. It's like our brains are creating a neural mirror of what others are experiencing.
It really is a fascinating area of research, and it highlights how connected our brains are to the social world. Now let's shift gears a bit. From learning, let's move into cognition and talk about how we make sense of all this information.
Sounds good to me. Where do we begin?
Let's start with attention, the gatekeeper of the mind, you could say.
Attention, you mean like focusing on something?
Exactly. Our senses are bombarded with information all the time. Attention lets us filter out the noise and focus on what's actually important.
So it's like a spotlight shining on the important stuff.
Perfect analogy. And that control over our attention is super important for learning, solving problems, even just navigating life.
I can see that. But our attention is pulled in so many directions these days. How do we decide what to focus on?
Well, our past experiences play a role, our goals, even our emotions.
So if I'm hungry, I'm more likely to notice restaurant signs or smell food cooking.
Precisely. Or if you're anxious, you might be hyper aware of potential dangers around you.
Makes sense. Now, I've heard that our attention spans are getting shorter, what with all the digital distractions and all. Is there any truth to that?
It's complicated. Technology definitely throws a lot of information our way, competing for our attention. But it's not necessarily that our attention spans are shrinking. It's more about how we're choosing to split our attention.
So, more about multitasking then, trying to do too many things at once.
Exactly. And while some people brag about being great multitaskers, research suggests our brains aren't really built for it.
So when we try to multitask, we're really just quickly switching back and forth between tasks.
Precisely. And that constant switching comes with a price. It takes mental effort to shift focus, which can lead to mistakes, less productivity, even more stress.
Makes you think twice about checking your phone every 5 minutes.
It does. And that's where good design can really make a difference. Think about websites. They use visual cues like color, spacing, even animation to capture and guide your attention.
So good design makes things easier to find and understand.
Exactly. It's like a well-organized map. And good design respects your cognitive limits. It avoids overwhelming you with too much information at once.
Speaking of limits, I remember hearing about the 7 plus or minus 2 rule. Like, people can only hold about 7 pieces of information in their short-term memory.
Yes, a common misconception. While our short-term memory does have limitations, it's not really about memorizing random lists. In reality, we're constantly scanning and recognizing information, not just recalling it from memory.
So when I scroll through my contacts, I don't need to memorize everyone's name and number. I just need to recognize the person I'm looking for.
Exactly. It's more about understanding that our working memory, the part that actively processes information, has its limits.
Okay, so we can't juggle too many mental balls at once.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to a pretty fascinating concept called external cognition.
External cognition, what's that about?
It's the idea that we use tools and external representations to lighten the load on our brains, you could say, to extend our mental capabilities.
Can you give me an example?
Think about using a calculator for complex math,
Oh, yeah.
or writing a to-do list to keep track of everything. We rely on calendars, notes, maps, even how we organize our physical space to help us think and remember things.
It's like when I rearrange letters in Scrabble to try to see new words.
That's a great example. It's called cognitive tracing, using external manipulation to help with problem solving.
So our thinking isn't limited to what's going on in our heads. We interact with our surroundings, use tools to help us think better.
Precisely. It emphasizes how interconnected our minds are with our environment. We're not isolated brains. We're shaping and being shaped by the world around us.
And that's a powerful concept. So we've talked about attention, memory, external cognition. What else is there in the world of cognition?
Well, let's talk about mental models.
Mental models, what are those?
They're basically our internal pictures of how things work, based on our experiences, beliefs, understanding of the world.
So like having a mental picture of how a bike works, or how a thermostat controls the temperature.
Exactly. We use them to make predictions, explain things, interact with the world. But here's the thing, sometimes those mental models are inaccurate.
Oh, I've definitely been there. Like when I thought turning the thermostat up higher would heat the room faster,
Yeah.
didn't work that way.
A classic example. And lots of people have these inaccurate models about how technology works too. Like thinking closing a laptop always shuts down the computer completely.
Yeah, and those inaccurate models can cause a lot of confusion.
Absolutely. Which is why good design is so important. Intuitive interfaces should align with users' existing mental models to avoid unnecessary complications.
So designers need to understand how people think about the world to create products that are easy to use.
Precisely. And that brings us back to that interconnected nature of cognition and learning. We're constantly updating our mental models based on new information, new experiences.
So learning is kind of like refining those mental models to better reflect how things actually work.
Exactly. The more accurate our models are, the better we are at understanding things, solving problems, navigating life's complexities.
Wow, this has been quite a journey already. We've covered emotions, learning, cognition. It's amazing how it all works together.
It really is. All these processes shaping how we see and interact with the world.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing this intricate system that governs how we think, feel, and act.
And one of the key takeaways here is that our minds aren't static. They're constantly adapting, learning, evolving.
And they're not confined to just our heads either. They extend outward, taking in information, using tools, influenced by social dynamics.
Exactly. We're not just thinking beings, we're feeling, learning, interacting beings in a constant dance with the world around us. You know, thinking back to that experiment with the epinephrine and the actors,
Yeah, that one really stuck with me.
it really makes you appreciate how powerful context is in shaping our emotions.
Oh, absolutely. We can misinterpret what we're feeling so easily.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to be aware of how our surroundings, the people we're with, can influence us. You know, we've all had days where everything just seems to irritate us.
Oh, tell me about it.
And maybe it's not entirely our fault. Maybe it's the environment we're in that's contributing to those feelings.
Right, so it's not just me being grumpy. It's the gloomy weather, the traffic jam, all of it adding up.
Exactly. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in.
Being able to manage our own emotions.
Yes, and understanding the emotions of others. It's a crucial skill for navigating all aspects of life, really.
Helps us build relationships, communicate better, all of that good stuff.
Absolutely. Now, while we're talking about cognition, there's another interesting concept I wanted to touch on. Distributed cognition.
Distributed cognition, I don't think I've heard of that one.
Well, it's the idea that our thinking isn't limited to just what's going on inside our individual brains.
Really?
It can be spread out, distributed across people, tools, even the environment.
So, like a group of people working together to solve a problem.
A perfect example. Think of a surgical team in an operating room. Each person has a specific role.
They rely on those specialized tools.
Yes. And those communication protocols, the way the room is set up, they all work together to achieve a common goal.
So the mental workload is shared.
Precisely. And it's not limited to just teams of people either. We distribute our cognition across tools and external representations all the time.
Like using a GPS to get around a new city.
Exactly.
Or taking notes to remember something important.
You got it. We're constantly offloading mental effort onto our surroundings. It frees up space in our minds for other things.
It's like our minds are expanding outward,
Yeah.
using information from the environment to help us think.
That's a great way to put it. Really emphasizes the dynamic interplay between our minds and the world around us.
This is making me rethink how I approach, well, everything. Maybe instead of trying to do everything on my own,
Yeah.
it's better to leverage the resources around me. Ask for help, use tools, all of that.
It's a valuable shift in perspective. By recognizing how distributed cognition works, we can create systems that encourage collaboration, leverage tools effectively, and ultimately make us all smarter together.
It's not just about individual brain power then, but about optimizing how information flows between people, tools, and the environment.
Exactly. Now, how about we switch gears a bit and talk about nonverbal communication?
Oh, like body language and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We express ourselves not just through words, but through our facial expressions, our body language, even our tone of voice.
And sometimes what we say doesn't match up with how we're acting.
All the time. Like when someone says they're fine, but their body language is screaming otherwise.
Exactly. So those nonverbal cues can tell us a lot about someone's true feelings.
Absolutely. Their intentions, their relationships with others.
So how can we get better at picking up on those nonverbal signals? What should we be looking for?
Well, pay attention to facial expressions. Our faces can convey a whole range of emotions.
And I've heard those expressions are pretty universal, right?
For the most part, yes. A smile means happiness, a frown means sadness, pretty much across cultures.
Okay, what else is important?
Body language. Our posture, gestures, how we move, it all tells a story.
Like someone who's fidgeting or avoiding eye contact might be anxious.
Exactly. While someone standing tall with their shoulders back might be feeling confident.
And then there's tone of voice.
Oh, yes. You can tell a lot from how someone's speaking. A sarcastic tone can change the meaning of a sentence completely.
And a shaky voice could mean someone's nervous.
Precisely. It's not just about the words, but how they're delivered.
So much more to communication than just the words we say.
There is. And it's not just about reading other people's cues either. It's about being aware of our own nonverbal communication too.
You mean being mindful of how we come across to others?
Exactly. It can help us connect better, build trust, communicate more effectively.
Wow, this is making me realize how much we communicate without even realizing it.
It's truly fascinating. Now, let's step back for a second and reflect on everything we've covered so far. Emotions, learning, cognition, nonverbal communication, it's all interconnected, shaping our experiences and interactions.
It's like we've been putting together a giant puzzle.
And a key piece of that puzzle is understanding that our minds are not static. They're constantly changing, adapting, learning, evolving.
And as we learned, those systems aren't confined to our heads. They reach out, incorporating information, tools, and even those social dynamics around us.
Precisely. We're not just thinking beings, we're feeling, learning, interacting beings in a constant dance with the world.
It's really incredible just how much goes on inside our minds.
It is, isn't it? And to think we've probably only scratched the surface.
I know. It makes you wonder about how much our everyday lives are being shaped by all these cognitive processes we've been talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Like, think about how you learn new things now.
Yeah.
How you make decisions, even how you interact with others. It's all influenced by these processes.
I'm definitely thinking back to those mental models we discussed. I bet I have a bunch of inaccurate ones floating around that I haven't even realized yet.
We all do. It's part of being human, really. The key is to stay open to new information and challenge our own assumptions.
So by understanding these processes, we can become better learners, better communicators.
Without a doubt. We can make smarter decisions and really live more fulfilling lives.
My mind is definitely buzzing after all of this. It's like we've been given a whole new set of tools to understand ourselves and the world around us.
That's the magic of learning. It opens up new possibilities and helps us grow.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored emotions, learning, and cognition. Keep those minds curious and engaged, and we'll see you next time.